Hey guys, it's Hannah, and today I'm coming to you with a video that I've been asked to make for several years now, and that is the if you like this, then try this book recommendations. This video is being made in paid promotion with Disney Book Group to celebrate the release of The Devouring Grey by Christine Lynn Herman. This book is said to be for fans of The Raven Boys and Stranger Things, and it follows three main perspectives. First, we have Violet, who is the new girl in town, and she doesn't really know anyone here until she finds out that her mom actually does have a history in this town that she's just moved to. Then the next perspective that we follow is that of Justin, whose family has basically protected the town that they live in for generations against the Grey, which is essentially like a dimension that has this monster imprisoned in it, so like kind of like the Upside Down. And the last perspective that we follow is Harper, and she had been stranded in the Grey for several days, and she blames Justin for that, so she's trying to get revenge on him. So it's kind of like this mysterious little town that has this alternate dimension with a monster in it, and three different perspectives of these three characters with their own kind of goals. So it sounds like a really fun, mysterious mix of like angst and drama, because apparently there are also like a lot of romances in here and great ships. So all of that sounds like fun to me. I know it's been said to be similar to Stranger Things, and I definitely see that from the synopsis, but I also really get some like Teen Wolf vibes from this. If any of you watched Teen Wolf like back in the day, I was very dedicated to that show. I loved it. And something about this kind of reminds me of that too. So I'm excited to read this, and I'm hoping it's similar to that. This book just came out on April 2nd, so you can now get your hands on a copy if you would like to check it out. There will be a link in the description box if you're interested in learning some more about it. But like I said, since this book is said to be for fans of The Raven Boys and Stranger Things, that kind of inspired this video because I'm going to be recommending books to you guys based off of other books that I really like. So I have a list of 5 books here that I have read and loved, and each one is paired with another book that I think is similar to that book, or I think fans of that book will enjoy the book that I have to recommend. So without any further ado, let's get into my recommendations. So first up, I have a recommendation based off of one of my favorite books of all time, and a book that I feel like I haven't talked about almost at all recently, which is kind of alarming, but that is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. As you all know, this is one of my favorite books ever. For the longest time, it was my favorite book of all time. I don't know if I can still say that because I love so many books, but it is definitely up there on my list. I hold this book so near and dear to my heart. I treasure it. I have a whole shelf just dedicated to it, but it is a very popular book, and I know plenty of people have read it. So if you like The Night Circus, then I think you will also like The Weight of Feathers by Anna Marie McLemore. The Weight of Feathers is actually a magical realism novel that is somewhat inspired by Romeo and Juliet. So it's not really a retelling of that by any means, but it's very much a star-crossed lovers type of story, which is very much what The Night Circus also is. The reason I recommend this one if you like The Night Circus is because it has such a vivid atmosphere, and it's also about people who are in a traveling circus, essentially very different from the circus within The Night Circus, but it is also a traveling circus, a traveling group of performers essentially, and it also has that very atmospheric vibe to it, which is one of the most significant things about The Night Circus. It also, like I said, has a really gripping star-crossed lovers romance, which again is something that is very present in The Night Circus as well. The Weight of Feathers follows the perspective of like 2 main characters, whereas The Night Circus follows like a whole cast of characters. But if you enjoyed the romance aspect of The Night Circus and the atmospheric vibe that it has, I definitely think you'll love The Weight of Feathers because those 2 things in here are absolutely beautiful. Also, I didn't even notice until just this second, but the blurb on this book says a gripping, beautifully rendered story and a fantastical world as captivating as The Night Circus, blurbed by Sabaa Tahir, the author of An Ember in the Ashes, which is another one of my favorite authors. I knew that at some point, but I completely forgot. So yeah, even Sabaa Tahir says that if you like The Night Circus, you'll like this, so trust her if you don't trust me. But again, highly, highly recommend it. As you all know, love this book with all my heart and soul, and I really love this one as well. I've given them both 5 out of 5 stars, so if you haven't read this one yet, I highly recommend that you do. Next up on my list, I have Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, and if you like this book, then I definitely think you will like Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. I've definitely compared these 2 books in the past. I used to talk about Eliza and Her Monsters like all the time because I love this book with all of my heart and soul, but it's just been a couple years since I've read it. But like I said, I've definitely compared these 2 books in the past, and I've talked about how similar they are. I know plenty of people have actually talked about how similar they are, but they are still very different stories. The reason I say you'll like Eliza if you like Fangirl is because both of them focus heavily on main characters that have an online presence or an online life. Kath from Fangirl writes fanfiction, and she's very popular for her Snowbaz fanfiction, and Eliza has a very popular webcomic called Monstrous Sea that she's been writing for years, and she's very famous online. So famous that people write fanfiction about her webcomic. I would like to see some sort of crossover at some point where Kath writes fanfiction about Monstrous Sea, because that would be like really cool, but we're not getting that. Both of the books also deal with main characters who struggle with anxiety. Kath and Eliza both deal with anxiety and they talk about it a lot, and I personally actually prefer Eliza and Her Monsters. I love Fangirl. I think it's a really fun book and I really did enjoy reading it, but I think Eliza and Her Monsters is what I wanted this book to be. Eliza and Her Monsters is one of the books that I read that's resonated with me the most in terms of a character having anxiety and talking about that, and because of that I love it so dearly. So yeah, highly recommend both of them, but if you have read Fangirl, because I feel like a lot of people have read this book since it's so popular and it's been out for so long, but you haven't read Eliza and Her Monsters yet, I highly suggest that you pick it up because it's such a good book. I feel like it was really popular around the time that it came out, but the hype for it has kind of died out, at least in my opinion. I don't know, maybe more people are reading it than I'm seeing, but I want more people to read it because I think everybody should read this book. It's phenomenal. Next up, I have The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicole Yoon. This is genuinely one of my favorite contemporary books I've ever read. Again, it's been a few years since I've read it, but I really do love this book. It's also being adapted into a film soon, and I know a lot of people have read and loved this story. So if you do like The Sun Is Also a Star, then I think you will also like Nora and Kettle by Lauren Nicole Taylor. I feel like this book is probably one of my biggest underrated book recommendations because almost nobody has read this, and I think it's just deeply underrated. It's just such a heartwarming story that I think is also very similar to The Sun Is Also a Star, but also different in a lot of ways. The Sun Is Also a Star follows two perspectives, that of Natasha and Daniel, who meet one day in New York City, and basically it's just like kind of how they fall in love, but also it's about a lot more because Natasha's family is about to be deported and she's trying to figure out how to stop that from happening. So it's a lot about immigration, it's a lot about identity, and it's a lot about this romance between these two characters as well. Nora and Kettle is also very similar to that, the difference being that this is actually a historical fiction novel, and it is also loosely inspired by Peter Pan. And I say loosely, it's not like a full-on retelling of Peter Pan by any means, it's just certain aspects of the story that are inspired by it. This book takes place in 1953 post-Japanese internment in the US, so it follows the story of Kettle, who is Japanese American trying to navigate the world post-Japanese internment, and Nora, who is white and deals with a very abusive family, a very abusive father, and it's about how the two of them find each other and find comfort in one another. I think one of the main reasons I say that these books are so similar, or that you'll like this one if you like The Sun Is Also a Star, is because it's another dual perspective story, but it's the same type of dual perspective that The Sun Is Also a Star kind of has, where it's just the story of these two individuals and then they eventually converge. And I really like that about The Sun Is Also a Star, and I really love it in Nora and Kettle as well. I like that they're both stories about people's lives who are falling apart, but then they're able to find some sort of comfort or some sort of relief in other people, in each other. And I think both of these stories do that beautifully, and I really think that this is an underrated book that more people should read because it's just so beautiful and so well done and absolutely heartbreaking. So yeah, definitely recommend checking out Nora and Kettle if you've read this one and loved it, because I definitely think you'll enjoy this book as well. Next, I have a book that I've mentioned, I think, in like one video, like one recommendation video, but I haven't really talked about it very much since then. But that book is Winter Girls by Laurie Halse Anderson. This is a very popular book. It's not as popular anymore because it's been out for quite some time at this point, but it is definitely a very popular book, especially in terms of books about people with eating disorders. It's definitely one of my favorite books that I've ever read, and I absolutely adore it, and I know it's really important to a lot of people. So if you like Winter Girls and you're looking for another story about people with eating disorders, then I definitely think you will like Paperweight by Meg Haston. This is one of my favorite contemporary books I have ever read, ever in my entire life. It's one of the most personal books for me, and it's a book that I actually have a really difficult time talking about, but I definitely think that if you're a fan of this one, you will love Paperweight as well. Paperweight follows the story of this 17-year-old girl named Stevie who has just entered a treatment center for an eating disorder, and she is trying to deal with the guilt that she feels around her brother's death. So a lot of the story obviously revolves around Stevie's eating disorder and her trying to cope with that, but also it is very much a story about her trying to navigate the relationships that she's had and trying to overcome a lot of the trauma that she's experienced in those relationships. Both of them are obviously deeply emotional books, very difficult to read, especially if you struggle with your mental health, specifically eating disorders. Obviously huge content warnings for both of these books for eating disorders, mental health, and suicide, but I think that Paperweight is truly one of the most underrated books that I have ever read. Even if you don't struggle with any of these things, even if like that's not something that you particularly care to read that much about, in terms of just like an incredible contemporary, this book is unbelievable and so underrated. It's truly haunting, and it's a debut novel as well, which is kind of unbelievable to me considering how well put together and well crafted and mature the story is. But I really do deeply treasure this book, and maybe one day I'll be able to talk about it in like more depth, but today's not that day. But regardless, if you did like Winter Girls, I highly suggest picking up Paperweight and giving this one a try because it's so underrated and it is so worth it. And finally, we are at the very last book that I have to recommend for you all, and I actually could pick a number of books to recommend this book based off of, but I decided to go with the one that I feel like it's probably the most similar to, and the one that I think that most people have probably read, and that book is The Diviners by Libba Bray. As you all know, I adore this series. It's like a paranormal historical YA fantasy, and it's phenomenal. It's set in New York in the 1920s, and it's truly one of my favorite series I've ever read. And I know how many people really love this series as well, and we're all desperately waiting for that last book to finally come out. But if you like The Diviners, then I think you will definitely love The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell, which I read recently, and I have not been able to shut up about it because it's so good. Like, I don't have words. It's just so good. I was thinking I could pick like a number of books, like I said earlier, to recommend The Last Magician based off of, because it also really reminds me of Six of Crows, and it also really reminds me of A Darker Shade of Magic. But in terms of theme and in terms of what I think that most people would like, I think it's most similar to The Diviners, so I'm recommending it based off of this one. I think the biggest reason for that is that The Last Magician is also a historical YA fantasy, which is kind of rare to find. You don't find historical fantasies very often, especially in YA. It's usually like urban fantasy, so it's set in modern day, and then it's high fantasy, so it's not really set in our world at all, so you don't really get like anything historical. But I love historical fiction, so when I can find historical fantasy, I'm down for that. The Last Magician takes place during the early 1900s, so like 1902. It's during the Gilded Age, and it's kind of complicated to describe, but it takes place in a world where magicians exist. So there are people who have magic, but they've been oppressed by people without magic, so they're not really allowed to use their magic very much. And it takes place in two timelines, so modern day New York City as well as New York City in 1902, and we follow around our main character named Esta, who has the ability to time travel. So she time travels back to 1902 in order to essentially steal an item, stop a heist. I don't really want to like go into detail because I don't think you should know too much before you read it, but basically she has to stop this heist from happening, and she goes back in time in order to do that. But that leads to a whole host of other problems that she did not foresee happening. It's far more complex than that, and one of my favorite things about this book, and one of the things I think that makes it the most similar to The Diviners, besides the historical New York City aspect, is that this book really talks about history. It talks about the history of New York during the Gilded Age, what immigration was like. It talks about Ellis Island, and that's one of my favorite things about the Diviners series, because this book series talks about the history of the US, of New York during the 20s and before that, what allowed people to live in the way that they did. It talks about immigration, it talks about the different groups of people who are living throughout the city, the way that it's all segregated, and it's wonderful. And I think that's such an incredible thing that both of these books do. You don't see a lot of fantasy books that actually talk about the history of what was going on in the place that they're set in, especially urban fantasies. Like, they don't really talk about that very often, and I really appreciate that these books do that. It's, I think, one of the best things about them. It also has a lot of angst and like romance that I really like, which is another one of my favorite things about The Diviners. So if you like that in this, then you'll definitely love it in this book too. Can't recommend this book enough. So if you did like The Diviners, I highly suggest reading The Last Magician. Truly an underappreciated book that like nobody has read, and more people should read it because it's phenomenal, wonderful. Please read it. I want everyone to read this book. Alright, so there you all have it. That is it for my list of if you like this, then you'll like this book recommendations. I hope you all enjoyed watching this video. Let me know in the comments down below if you agree with any of my recommendations. Have you read both of the books that I recommended? Did you think they're similar as well, or did you like both of them, or did you only like one? I want to know. I'm very curious. Also, if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, please do let me know. I actually had a really fun time putting this list together. I'm kind of thinking of doing one based off of like TV shows or movies. Not really movies, I don't watch enough movies, but TV shows. So like if you like this TV show, then you'll like this book, because I have a long list for that one. So if that's something you guys would like to see, please do definitely let me know. Don't forget, if you would like to check out the Devouring Grey, all the links for it will be in the description box, so you can go and read about it yourself if you'd like to. But that is pretty much it for this video. So if you would like to follow me on any of my social media, all my links are in the description box as always. But thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!